the secret to my husband's wealth, a sacrifice she never expected. The mansion was a beacon of opulence against the inky sky, its countless windows gleaming like mocking eyes. Inside, on the polished obsidian of the foyer, Amelia felt a chill that settled deep in her bones, a permanent resident after 10 years of marriage to Julian. 10 years of luxury purchased with unspoken questions. Julian Sterling, the enigma she called her husband, had risen from obscurity to become a tech titan, his empire built on Synapse, an app that promised to unlock the full potential of the human mind. It was a mystery to her, his secrets and his thoughts. He'd spun a fairy tale, a scholarship girl swept away by the brilliant, eccentric visionary. She had been a librarian with a simple life. But the fairy tale was riddled with unsettling details, hushed phone calls, clandestine trips, a guardedness that flickered in his eyes whenever she dared to question his methods. His actions haunted her. Tonight, the unsettling details solidified into something concrete, something deeply disturbing. A sleek black sedan idled in the driveway, its tinted windows reflecting the mansion on itself like a distorted mirror. Julian was inside, locked in an intense conversation with a stranger whose face was obscured by the shadows. As Amelia watched, the man handed Julian a small, lacquered box, no bigger than a jewelry case. Julian accepted it with trembling hands, his expression a chilling blend of fear and desperation. Whatever that box contained, Amelia knew it was the keystone to Julian's empire, the secret he had guarded with such fervor. And a primal fear gripped her. Uncovering that secret would demand a sacrifice she wasn't prepared to make. The seed of anger had taken root. Amelia had found solace in the quiet order of the Havenwood Library, a sanctuary of knowledge where the scent of aged paper and binding glue mingled with the comforting aroma of brewing chamomile tea. Her life was simple, defined by a love of literature and a gentle dedication to her community. Then Julian arrived, a magnetic force disrupting the tranquil rhythm of her existence. He was drawn to Havenwood, he claimed, seeking respite from the relentless pressure of the tech world as he built his new company. He was enthralled by Amelia's quiet intelligence, her unwavering integrity, and the inner light that shone through her unassuming exterior. He painted a beautiful picture. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments and impassioned declarations, culminating in a fairy tale wedding that transformed Amelia from a small-town librarian into a society wife overnight. She embraced her new life, trading her cozy apartment for a sprawling estate overlooking the Pacific, her simple wardrobe for designer gowns and glittering jewels. But the transition was jarring. She was so different. As Julian's wealth exploded, he became increasingly remote, consumed by his work, retreating behind a wall of secrecy that Amelia couldn't penetrate. He was no longer the man she loved. She tried to adapt, immersing herself in charitable causes, hosting lavish parties, and cultivating a circle of vapid acquaintances who seemed more interested in Julian's status than her company. She could not relate. But the emptiness persisted. She missed the quiet intimacy of her old life, the meaningful conversations with her friends, and the simple joy of losing herself in a good book. Her life had become a parade of distractions. She voiced her concerns to Julian, but he always dismissed them, assuring her that his work was for their future and that she had nothing to worry about. But he was lying. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Julian was concealing a truth that would shatter their carefully constructed world. The seed of anger was a tree now. Her only confidant was Mrs. Henderson, the estate's longtime housekeeper, a woman whose sharp eyes and quiet wisdom missed nothing. Mrs. Henderson offered subtle words of caution, hinting at the dark undercurrents that flowed beneath the Sterling family's polished facade. The family was rotten. But even Mrs. Henderson seemed hesitant to delve too deep, as if some unspoken fear held her back. Amelia felt increasingly isolated, trapped in a gilded cage with a man she barely knew. Amelia found herself trapped at a lavish fundraising gala for Julian's latest philanthropic endeavor, a stilted affair teeming with the city's elite. The hollow conversations grated on her nerves. As she politely excused herself from a particularly tedious conversation with a self-proclaimed tech guru, she overheard fragments of a hushed exchange that stopped her cold. "Did you see what happened to Thorn?" a man murmured, his voice laced with a nervous tremor. "Yeah, a real shame," his companion replied, glancing around furtively. "Got too close to the source code, they say. Julian doesn't like loose ends." Amelia's blood ran cold. Thorn was Marcus Thorn, an investigative journalist who had been nosing around Julian's company, probing into the technology behind Synapse and its meteoric rise. She knew she had to do something. A few weeks prior, Thorn had vanished. The official explanation was a sudden book deal that required him to disappear into the wilderness. No one had heard from him since. But hearing these men speak of Thorn's disappearance with such chilling nonchalance, Amelia's carefully constructed reality began to crumble. Later that night, as Julian locked himself in his study, Amelia made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. She would no longer be a passive observer. It was her time to act. She crept into Julian's study, a space she had always felt forbidden to enter. The room exuded an air of sterile power, filled with expensive artifacts and state-of-the-art technology. She meticulously searched his desk, his files, and his encrypted computer, but found nothing to corroborate the whispers she had overheard, nothing to explain Thorn's disappearance or the true source of Julian's wealth. He was extremely good at his job. Just as despair began to set in, her gaze landed on an antique music box resting on a high shelf, a piece she had never seen before. Drawn by an inexplicable force, she reached for the box and lifted the lid. A haunting melody filled the room, a melody that seemed to echo a long-forgotten sorrow. And then she saw it, a hidden compartment beneath the music mechanism containing a single, ornate silver key. The chase had begun. Amelia cradled the silver key, her mind a whirlwind of questions and mounting dread. What did it unlock? What secrets were buried behind its intricate design? She had to act fast. The next day, while Julian was immersed in a high-stakes business meeting in Tokyo, Amelia put her plan into motion. She had to discover the truth, whatever the cost. She knew she might not make it back. Her initial search of the house yielded nothing. The key didn't fit any of the locks, and soon, he felt as though she would lose it forever. She began to feel trapped. Defeated but not broken, Amelia confided in Mrs. Henderson, revealing the key and sharing her growing suspicions about Julian's company and Thorn's sudden disappearance. Mrs. Henderson listened intently, her face etched with a mixture of concern and resignation. "Some doors are best left unopened, dearie," she said softly, her gaze distant. But Amelia was resolute. She couldn't ignore her conscience, the gnawing conviction that Julian's success was built on something deeply sinister. Sensing Amelia's unwavering determination, Mrs. Henderson reluctantly offered a cryptic clue. "The Sterlings have owned a property outside town for generations," she revealed, her voice barely above a whisper. "An old research facility. Julian's father worked there. Some say experiments took place. The building was closed down, and the building was left alone." Amelia pressed for more details, but Mrs. Henderson clammed up, her eyes clouding with a mixture of fear and regret. She was afraid to tell her. Armed with this new information, Amelia set off for the abandoned Sterling research facility, a sprawling complex shrouded in overgrown vegetation and an unsettling silence. As she made her way into town, it was a scene from a horror movie. The facility was a labyrinth of decaying buildings, rusted machinery, and shattered windows. Amelia felt a prickle of unease as she navigated the deserted corridors, the air thick with the scent of decay and forgotten secrets. The hallways were dark. She tested the key on every door she encountered, her hope dwindling with each failed attempt. She was alone. In the main laboratory, she discovered a hidden elevator concealed behind a wall of chalkboards covered in complex equations and diagrams. This must be it. She inserted the silver key into the control panel, her hand trembling with anticipation. The elevator lurched to life, descending into the depths of the earth. This was not going to be good. The elevator shuddered to a halt, the doors sliding open to reveal a vast, subterranean chamber bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. The hair on Amelia's arm stood on end. The chamber was filled with rows of gleaming servers, humming with an unsettling energy. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting the servers to a series of glass pods, each containing a human brain suspended in a nutrient-rich fluid. She had no idea what she was looking at. Amelia stumbled through the chamber, her mind reeling from the grotesque spectacle before her. She realized that Julian's Synapse app wasn't just unlocking the potential of the human mind. It was harvesting it, extracting thoughts, memories, and emotions from living brains to fuel his technology and amass his fortune. He needed the power. The stolen thoughts were then sold on the dark web for nefarious things. Marcus Thorne had stumbled upon this horrifying truth, and Julian had silenced him, his brain now serving as a digital battery in this macabre laboratory. She now knew the whole truth. Amelia choked back a sob, her body trembling with revulsion and grief. How could Julian, the man she had loved, be capable of such monstrous acts? As she stood in the heart of Julian's digital graveyard, a voice shattered the silence. "I see you've discovered my little secret, Amelia," Julian said, his voice echoing through the chamber. He didn't sound surprised. Amelia whirled around to see Julian standing in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with a chilling intensity. "You had no right to come here. How could you do this, Julian?" Amelia asked, her voice filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "How could you steal people's minds?" Julian stepped closer, his expression a chilling mix of arrogance and desperation. "I did it for us, Amelia," he said, his voice almost pleading. "To give us a life beyond your wildest dreams. It was a sacrifice I was willing to make." "A sacrifice of other people's minds and bodies?" Amelia retorted, recoiling from his touch. "That's not a sacrifice, Julian. That's a crime against humanity." She wanted to scream. Julian's face twisted with anger. "You wouldn't understand," he spat. "The power, the potential, it's intoxicating. I was on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the human mind." "At what cost?" Amelia challenged, her voice rising. "At the cost of human dignity? At the cost of human lives?" This wasn't who she was. "I was so close, Amelia," Julian hissed, his eyes blazing with a manic intensity. "Don't you see? I could have changed the world." "You were destroying it, Julian," Amelia countered, her voice ringing with conviction. "And I won't let you continue." Julian lunged towards her, his eyes consumed with rage. "You're going to ruin everything." Amelia, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, sidestepped his attack. She would not be a victim. She grabbed a nearby wrench and swung it with all her might, striking Julian on the side of the head. He stumbled, momentarily disoriented. Seizing the opportunity, Amelia raced towards the central control panel, determined to shut down the entire operation. She was not strong enough to do it. Julian recovered and charged after her, his face contorted with fury. He tackled her to the ground, pinning her beneath him. "You can't stop me, Amelia," he snarled, his hands tightening around her throat. "I'm too powerful." Amelia struggled against him, clawing at his face, desperate to break free. She was not going to die here. Just as she began to lose consciousness, she saw a flicker of movement in the periphery. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly housekeeper, her face set with grim determination, crept into the chamber, wielding a fire axe she must have found nearby. With a strength that belied her age, Mrs. Henderson swung the axe, cleaving through the power cables that connected Julian's brain-harvesting machine to the central grid. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the entire chamber plunged into darkness. Julian screamed, his body convulsing violently as the machine overloaded, the stolen thoughts and memories surging back into the brains from which they had been extracted. In the chaos, Amelia managed to break free from Julian's grasp. She stumbled to her feet, her body shaking, her mind reeling. The room plunged into darkness. She had no idea what had happened to Julian, but she knew that she had to get out of there. She was the only one that had survived. Guided by Mrs. Henderson, Amelia stumbled through the darkness, navigating the treacherous corridors of the research facility. They emerged into the night air, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. The research facility exploded behind them, a fiery testament to Julian's ambition and its devastating consequences. He had failed. Amelia turned herself into the authorities, confessing her role in the events that had transpired. She was prepared to face the consequences of her actions. She testified against Julian's accomplices, exposing the vast network of corruption and exploitation that had enabled his crimes. She was the only one to leave. In the aftermath, Amelia returned to Havenwood, seeking solace in the familiar embrace of her community. The town had changed. She used her experience to advocate for responsible technology, to raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked corporate greed, and to protect the vulnerable from exploitation. She would not be silenced. She found peace in the simple things: the scent of old books, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the quiet satisfaction of making a difference in the world. She never forgot Julian or the sacrifices he had demanded. But she refused to let his darkness define her. She would not let him win.